All right, so get this picture in your mind. It's 2008. The world is like totally freaking out, right? Financial meltdown, the whole 9 yards. But over at Amazon, Jeff Bezos is sending out his annual shareholder letter, and it's like this crazy burst of optimism. Like he's looking right past all the chaos, and he sees something amazing on the horizon, and we are diving deep into this 2008 letter today. And trust me, you are going to want to stick around for this one because it's not just about Amazon's past. It's like this roadmap packed with these crazy, insightful nuggets that you can totally use in your own work and your own decisions.
Yeah, what really gets me is that Bezos actually includes his very first shareholder letter from 1997, like right inside this 2008 one. It's a pretty bold move, if you ask me. Almost like he's saying, hey, my vision hasn't changed a bit.
Okay, long-term
Yeah.
thinking, right? We hear that phrase tossed around all the time, but Bezos really takes it to like a whole other level. So how does that actually play out in the real world? What kind of decisions come from that?
It's like holding off on that instant gratification. Like choosing to pour tons of money into something massive, like a nationwide network of fulfillment centers, even though it might mean you'll see less profit right away. That's the kind of wild move that long-term thinking makes possible.
So it's kind of like having the guts to bet on the future, even when the present is like a little shaky. And speaking of bets, the Kindle was a huge one for Amazon back in 2008.
Right. Bezos spells out his vision in the letter, every book ever printed available in like less than a minute. Did they even know the first thing about making hardware back then?
Nope, not a clue. That's what's so crazy. They had zero experience in that whole world, but they were willing to learn, adapt, bring in the best of the best just to make this vision happen. All right, now this is where things get really interesting for me. The letter talks about this approach to pricing that seemed kind of backwards at first. Like they're more worried about earning the customer's trust than making a quick profit.
Yeah, exactly. Bezos was totally convinced that if their prices were consistently low, people would become loyal customers, and that would mean more sales in the long haul. He called it earning trust, and he was totally fine with making a little less money right away to make it happen.
But did it actually work? I mean, was there any proof that this whole approach was worth it?
Oh, absolutely. Take their free shipping offers through Amazon Prime, for example. The letter says that just in 2008 alone, they saved customers over $800 million in shipping costs. That's like a gigantic investment in making people feel good about Amazon, wouldn't you say?
800 million. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that would create some serious loyalty. You get exactly what you want, fast and at a great price. No wonder people got hooked on Amazon. But then there's this other concept. Bezos keeps coming back to this idea of muda.
Ah, yes, muda.
Yeah.
It's Japanese for waste, and it's something Bezos seems to find almost exciting. Not like in a wasteful way, obviously. He
Yeah.
sees muda as a sign that things can be better, like an opportunity to tweak and make things even more awesome.
It's like he's saying, hey, look, we're not perfect, but we're always trying to be better. Most people would probably look at inefficiency as a bad thing. But for Bezos, it's like this key ingredient in the recipe for innovation.
And this is super clear in the three core parts of the customer experience that he talks about in the letter. Low prices, tons of selection, and fast, convenient delivery. Each of these is kind of designed to like get rid of muda and give the customer the most value possible.
Okay, so low prices build
Yes.
trust. A massive selection means people can find what they want, and fast delivery? Well, who doesn't love convenience? But
Yeah.
how are they actually pulling this off back in 2008?
Well, the letter mentions something called fulfillment by Amazon FBA. It was still pretty new back then, but it let other sellers basically plug into Amazon's massive delivery network.
So Amazon takes care of storing the stuff, packing it up, shipping it, the whole shebang, which means sellers can spend more time making great products.
Exactly. And for customers, it means they can find even more different things to buy and often get it delivered just as quickly and for free, just like they're used to from Amazon. It was a total game changer.
And for customers, it means they can find even more different things to buy and often get it delivered just as quickly and for free, just like they're used to from Amazon. It was a total game changer. But there's this little detail in the letter that I find super interesting, almost kind of funny looking back. It talks about endless.com. Do you remember what that was all about?
Endless.com. Wait, wasn't that Amazon's attempt at selling shoes online?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And even Bezos admits he was surprised by how successful it became.
Yeah.
It just goes to show that even with all their data and number crunching, they were still willing to try new things and jump into the unknown.
So even Amazon had its day one moments right. But let's circle back to that 1997 letter that Bezos included in the 2008 one. Why do you think he did that? Was it just a trip down memory lane?
I think it's way more strategic than that. It's like he's highlighting how his vision has stood the test of time. If you compare the two letters, you see the same core principles. Long-term thinking, customer obsession, willingness to invest big, It's almost like he's saying, look, this isn't just some trendy thing. This is who we are at our core.
It's pretty amazing to see how those early ideas from 97 became the foundation of this company that by 2008 was already like turning the whole retail world upside down. But here's something I'm wondering about. In the 2008 letter, Bezos barely even mentions his competitors. It's almost like they don't even exist. Was he just being cocky?
I don't think it's cockiness. It's focusedness. Bezos truly believed that spending too much time thinking about the competition would just distract them from what really mattered. He believed that real innovation came from focusing on the customer, not on what other companies were up to.
So instead of playing defense, they were always on offense, pushing the limits of what was possible in e-commerce.
And that brings us to this whole idea of day one thinking, which Bezos emphasizes in both letters. So what does that actually mean?
It's about approaching every single day with the same energy, enthusiasm, and drive as if it were the very first day of your company. It's about staying nimble, avoiding complacency, always looking for ways to improve.
It's like they're constantly in startup mode, even though they were already this massive company in 2008.
Exactly. And that day one mentality is all over the letter, especially when he talks about hiring and keeping great employees.
He makes it super clear that people are Amazon's most valuable asset. And he talks about building a team of missionaries, not mercenaries, people who really believe in what the company is doing.
And he's not just talking about passion, he's talking about ownership. He stresses how important it is to pay employees fairly with a big chunk of their pay tied to stock options.
So it's like everyone at Amazon has a piece of the pie. They're not just working for a paycheck. They're building something together. It's a pretty brilliant way to get everyone on the same page and create this culture of shared ownership. But remember, all of this was happening while the world was basically having a financial meltdown.
It's wild, isn't it? While other companies were batting down the hatches and playing it safe, Bezos was still optimistic, even like super pumped about Amazon's future. He saw the crisis not as this scary threat, but as an opportunity.
An opportunity to double down on those core principles, to invest in their people and their infrastructure, and to come out of the whole mess even stronger than before.
You got it. It's this powerful message of resilience and determination, and it speaks volumes about the power of thinking long-term and never wavering from that customer focus.
So what does this all mean for you? Where's the muda in your world? What chances to make things better are hiding right under your nose? Bezos' challenge to find and eliminate waste is like this call to action for all of us.
Think about it this way. How can you use these ideas of long-term thinking, customer obsession, and that day one energy in your own work and your own goals?
We'll be back in a bit to dig up even more insights from this incredible letter. Stick with us.
And welcome back to our deep dive into Amazon's 2008 shareholder letter.
Where we're like treasure hunters, uncovering all the secrets behind Amazon's crazy success, even when the world was in a total financial panic.
Yeah, it's pretty wild how they managed to not just survive, but thrive during that time.
Right. It all comes back to what we were talking about earlier, that laser focus on the long game.
Exactly. Like they have this internal compass always pointing towards the future, no matter what's happening right now.
And that brings us to another fascinating part of the letter, how Bezos talks about competition. Or actually how he doesn't really talk about it.
You noticed that too, huh? He barely mentions competitors at all. Like they just don't exist in his mind.
Right. It's so strange. But I think it's totally intentional. Bezos is a firm believer that obsessing over the competition is just a distraction.
It's like a shiny object syndrome. You get so caught up in what everyone else is doing that you lose sight of what really matters.
Which is
serving the customer. That's the ultimate goal. And that focus is crystal clear in those three pillars of the customer experience we talked about earlier. Low prices, vast selection, and fast, convenient delivery.
You know, it's funny. Those things almost seem obvious, right? Like, of course, people want low prices and quick shipping. But it's how Amazon executes on those things that sets them apart.
Totally. It's not enough to just offer those things separately. It's about weaving them together to create this seamless and enjoyable experience for the customer.
Like a well-oiled machine, each part working perfectly in sync with the others. But wasn't there some pushback against Amazon's pricing strategies? I vaguely remember people accusing them of undercutting competitors just to gain market share.
Yeah, there were definitely concerns about that, especially from smaller businesses who felt like they couldn't possibly compete with Amazon's massive resources.
Right, that makes sense. But Bezos always insisted that their goal was to provide value to the customer, not to drive other companies out of business.
And they put their money where their mouth was with things like free shipping and insanely low prices.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue with that, especially from a customer's perspective.
Totally. And if you look closely at the letter, you could see how they were already putting these principles into practice back in 2008.
Oh, for sure. Take fulfillment by Amazon. or FBA as they call it.
FBA, right?
It's a perfect example of how Amazon is always innovating to make things easier for both customers and sellers. By taking care of all the logistics like storing, packing, shipping, all of that jazz, Amazon gives sellers the freedom to focus on what they do best, creating awesome products.
And customers get to enjoy a wider selection of stuff, often with that same speedy free shipping they've come to expect from Amazon. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And it just shows how dedicated they are to constantly improving the customer experience. Okay, but what about this whole day one thing? Is that even sustainable in the long run? I mean, companies change, they grow. Doesn't day one thinking eventually become unrealistic or even like a hindrance?
That's a good question. It does seem like a tall order to maintain that level of energy and enthusiasm as a company gets bigger and more established.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even Bezos would agree that holding on to that day one mentality gets tougher as a company matures. But the core ideas behind it, that agility, customer focus, willingness to experiment, those never go out of style.
So it's less about literally pretending it's your first day in business and more about preserving that entrepreneurial spirit, that hunger to constantly evolve and innovate.
Exactly. And that commitment extends beyond just their retail business. Remember, this is also when Amazon Web Services, or AWS, was really taking off.
AWS, right? For those who might not be familiar, it's Amazon's cloud computing platform.
Hmm.
It's become a massive business in its own right, powering everything from tiny startups to huge corporations.
And what's amazing is that AWS, just like the Kindle, came from Amazon's willingness to dive headfirst into new challenges and develop new skills. They saw a need in the market businesses struggling to manage their own IT infrastructure, and they built a solution that's now basically the industry standard.
It's another example of how their long-term thinking and customer obsession have led to some pretty incredible innovations.
Definitely. And it highlights a really important part of their approach. They're not afraid to kind of cannibalize their own business if it means serving the customer better.
Now that's interesting. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, think about it. AWS basically offers the same infrastructure that Amazon itself uses to run its giant e-commerce operations. They could have easily kept that check all to themselves, but instead they opened it up to everyone, even potential competitors.
So they were willing to disrupt themselves to create competition in a new market because they believed it would ultimately benefit the customer in the end.
Exactly. It's a pretty bold move, especially for a company that was already the king of e-commerce. But it shows how willing they are to challenge conventional wisdom and push the limits of what's possible.
It's like they're saying, we're not just competing with other companies, we're competing with ourselves. They're always pushing to be better, to do more, to innovate faster.
It's this constant upward trajectory, and that relentless drive to improve is like baked into the very DNA of Amazon's culture. But there's another thing that really struck me about this letter, Bezos' emphasis on frugality.
Frugality. But Amazon is known for pouring money into things like fulfillment centers, research and development, new product categories. How does that go hand in hand with being frugal?
It's not about being cheap. It's about being smart with your resources. It's about avoiding unnecessary spending, making the most of what you have, and ensuring that every dollar counts.
So it's more like a waste not, want not mentality.
Exactly. And this frugality ties directly back to the idea of muda, or waste, that we were talking about earlier. By eliminating unnecessary expenses, you're essentially cutting down on waste and freeing up resources that can be used in other areas of the business that really matter.
It really makes you think, where's the muda in our own lives? What are we spending time and energy on that isn't really serving us? Maybe we could all learn a thing or two from Amazon's approach.
Totally. It's about being more intentional with how we use our resources, both in our personal and professional lives. And as we keep digging into this letter, we'll see how this frugality combined with their long-term vision and customer obsession has helped Amazon achieve such phenomenal success.
Stick with us as we continue to explore the secrets of Amazon's 2008 shareholder letter and discover the timeless principles that are still driving their success even today. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are still swimming in all this wisdom from Jeff Bezos' 2008 shareholder letter.
It's really something else, isn't it? How a letter written like 15 years ago can still feel so relevant today.
Right. It's like Bezos had some kind of time machine or something. This letter is full of these insights that are just as useful in today's business world as they were back then.
Totally. And one of the things that really jumps out is Bezos' thing about keeping a day one mentality. You know, he talks about it in both the 97 and 2008 letters. It's that idea of approaching business. Like it's your very first day, all that energy and passion and drive.
Okay, so it's not just like reminiscing about the good old days.
No, not even close. It's about holding on to that entrepreneurial spirit, that drive to constantly be innovating and improving. resisting that urge to just sit back and relax when things are going well.
But how do you actually do that? I mean, companies grow, they get more complicated, more bureaucratic. Doesn't that day one thinking become impossible to keep up at some point?
It's a tough one, for sure. There's no doubt about that. But I think the key is to focus on the core principles behind that whole day one thinking.
Hmm.
Things like agility being customer focused, a willingness to experiment. Those are things that any company, big or small, old or new, can really embrace.
So it's less about literally acting like a startup and more about keeping that startup mindset, that hunger for innovation.
You got it.
But is there a risk of taking that too far? I mean, could always pushing for that day one energy lead to burnout or maybe a lack of focus?
That's a good question. It's definitely important to find that sweet spot.
Yeah.
You need a clear vision, a solid long-term strategy, but you also need to be able to adapt when things change.
It's like that difference between being reckless and being, carefully daring.
Mm.
You need that sense of adventure, but you got to know when to step back, when to sort of enjoy what you've achieved.
Exactly. And I think Bezos shows a pretty good understanding of that in the letter. He's obviously ambitious, wants to push the limits, but he's also practical, focused on building a business that will last.
And speaking of lasting, one thing that really stood out to me was how much Bezos talks about frugality. I mean, it seems kind of contradictory, right? Here's this company pouring billions into new technologies, new buildings, but they're also obsessed with saving pennies.
Right.
It's strange.
It's not about being stingy. It's about being resourceful. It's about cutting out unnecessary expenses, getting the most out of what you have, making sure every dollar counts.
So it's more like that waste, not want, not kind of thinking.
Exactly. And that frugality, I think, is really connected to that whole concept of muda, or waste, that we were talking about earlier. By getting rid of unnecessary expenses, you're basically minimizing waste and freeing up resources to invest in other parts of the business.
It makes you wonder, where's the muda in our own lives, right?
Yeah.
What are we spending time and money on that we don't really need? Maybe we could all learn a little something from Amazon's approach.
Absolutely. It's about being aware of how we're using our resources, both personally and professionally. And I think it's a pretty valuable lesson we can take away from this letter, whether we're running some huge company or just trying to manage our own budget at home.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Amazon's 2008 shareholder letter, what are the big takeaways? What can we learn from Bezos's insights all these years later?
For me, it's about the power of thinking long term, building a company that's focused on creating real value for the customer.
Yeah, it's about being bold, but also being smart. Taking risks, but knowing how to manage them.
It's about being frugal, but not cheap. Investing wisely, but also knowing when to cut back without sacrificing quality.
It's about building a team of people who are passionate and dedicated people who believe in the mission and are willing to go above and beyond.
It's about embracing challenges, setbacks, even failures, seeing them as chances to learn and grow.
It's about holding on to that day one energy, that hunger for innovation, that constant drive to improve.
And at the end of the day, it's about building a company that's not just successful, but one that makes a real difference in the world.
That's a pretty high bar to set. But it's clear that Bezos wasn't aiming for anything less.
And I think that's what makes this letter so inspiring, so timeless. It reminds us that even when things are uncertain and chaotic, it's still possible to do amazing things if you have a vision, strong principles, and the courage to go after your dreams.
So what about you? What really resonated with you from this deep dive? What ideas or insights are you going to take away and use in your own life or work?
Remember, it's still day one. What are you going to do with it?
That is a fantastic question to think about.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time.